In this lesson, I will briefly review leadership ethics. I believe that the handbook will give you a definition of ethics, but for our purposes today, I want to do more of a description or some ways that we need to look at ethics. Also, the handbook does an excellent job of giving you the theoretical background of leadership and ethics, but I'm going to do more of a practical approach to ethics and ethical decision making within organizations. So I think we all can agree that ethics is a central component of leadership. Why? Well, first of all, leadership requires the leader to have an impact on the lives of followers, both within the organization and also many times the leader's personality even becomes part of the decisions that the follower makes outside of the organization. So in other words, leaders have major influence over their followers. Also, leaders have the need and the ability to engage followers in order to accomplish mutual organizational goals. There's also power and control differences. So many times followers believe that they must do what the leader states, and therefore the leader has lots of power when it comes to what the follower may do. And then finally, it is the leader's job or the leader's role in creating an ethical climate. In other words, the examples set by the leader often end up creating the type of environment or the climate within the particular organization. So there are many examples that we can use when we talk about leadership and its impact on what happens within an organization. But let's, for our example today, look at the recent Volkswagen emissions scandal. Basically what happened was that some of the Volkswagen vehicles, when you would go to get your vehicle inspected, it would conceal or emit false emissions checks. In other words, your car may have been emitting some dangerous pollutions, but the check that would come back would say, oh, everything is perfectly fine. Initially, Volkswagen tried to say that this was the work of just a few people, but as we found out more and more about it, we then learned that maybe it was the work of just a few engineers, but then we were also told that many executives may have known about the report, and even perhaps that the CEO had been informed of what was going on. So in other words, we had the chance in a lot of different ways to stop this from happening at Volkswagen, and they didn't do it. They just decided not to do it. A lot of people turned deaf ears on what was going on. Even if it was the work of one or two people to begin with, as more and more heard about it, if that ethical climate at Volkswagen would have been strong enough, then it would have been stopped somewhere along the way. And again, as we said on the previous slide, that it's the leader's job to create such an ethical climate. So if we had to describe, look at ethics, the word ethics, we're talking about the values and morals an individual or society deem appropriate or desirable. So we're focusing on the virtuousness of individuals and their motives. We use these to provide a system of rules or principles for decision making. So in other words, when we know what our ethical or our moral standards are, we can use that information to make decisions of right and wrong or good and bad within a particular organizational situation. There are many ways that we can describe ethics, but we're going to look at it today in terms of character and conduct, and really more so the conduct side. But starting out with the ethics as character, there are many studies and many views of leadership or ethical leadership that look at words or habits of people with good ethical standards. So we talk about leaders in terms of being courageous or honest or fair or just, having integrity or humility, and these are virtuous components or characters of the leader. We want to focus most of our discussion today, though, on the conduct of the leader. So what actions are seen as being associated with leadership and good ethics within the decision-making of leaders? Well, the first thing we want to understand is that while we use our feelings, perhaps our religious background, we use the law, we use culturally accepted norms and science to make ethical decisions as leaders, these are not synonymous with ethics. For example, just because our feelings are our feelings, it doesn't mean that someone else will share those same feelings, and it doesn't mean that they will do the same thing we'll do. We both may come to an ethical decision, but our feelings on the particular situation may be different. Similarly, with our religion, we've seen examples where religious and non-religious people or people of different religions can come to the same ethical conclusion. So it's not necessarily the same as our religion. And there are plenty of other examples of the law and culturally accepted norms in science. So we use these things and these types of things to help us make an ethical decision, but they're not the same as it. So let's look at some ways that ethics and our decision making come into play. The first way we may make an ethical decision or determine what decision to make is the utilitarian view. So this is when we consider anticipated outcomes and consequences when evaluating an ethical dilemma. In this particular way, the utilitarian view states that the leader's ethical action is the one that produces the greatest good and does the least harm for all those who are affected. In other words, what's best for the majority? We're going to go with the majority rules here. So if a particular decision is favorable to most of our customers or most of our employees or shareholders of the community and the environment, then that's the one we're going to go with. So we're going to look to do what does the greatest good and does the least harm for the most people, for most of the parties involved. With the self-interest view, or the ethical egoism view, I believe is how the book phrases it, in that particular view, the leader's ethical action is the one that produces the greatest good for the leader. So the leader is looking out for themselves first. When in doubt, do what's best for yourself. So the leader will make the decision that serves them and their needs first. With the rights view, the leader's ethical decision will be one that's based on protecting basic individual rights. So they tend to follow not necessarily the rules, but the rights of a particular individual in a given situation. For example, this past fall, students were allowed to carry handguns, concealed handguns, on campus, and this is because of legislation that came out saying that it is legal for students to carry handguns on college campuses. So supporters of this particular decision used the argument in many cases that it's our right to carry handguns. It's our amendment where we've got our right, our government gives us that right to carry handguns, and since the campus is a government part of the government, then they should be able to carry concealed guns on campus. And so they used the rights view in order to make this particular decision. With the justice view, we are following particular rules and laws. So it's not necessarily our right, but it's given to us because it's one of our laws. For example, if it's the law to buckle up your seatbelt, then you're going to follow that particular way of doing things simply because it's the law. The law says it, therefore that's the way it's going to go. Another way we make decisions is through integrative social contracts. In other words, the common good. So we tend to base our decisions on what are the norms of a particular business or culture or community. Going back to that Volkswagen example that we used earlier, somewhere along the way the cultural norm was to ignore some of the ethical decisions that were going on, or to take more of an open approach to the ethics and to ignore some of these issues. So no one wanted to be the whistleblower, and so since no one else was doing it, no one actually did it. So the leader in this particular situation tends to follow accepted practices or norms of that particular organization. We can call this when in Rome, do like the Romans. And then finally, we tend to base some of our ethical decisions on personal or religious convictions. In these cases, we want to do what aligns with our belief system. So many people at one point were wearing the "What would Jesus do" bands. That's a statement basically saying, and if you put it into these terms, that this person is going to decide to do whatever their religious or belief system states that they should do. So they're going to follow that way when they're making decisions. So a classic ethical dilemma is the case of John, who is the captain of a submarine. An explosion has caused the sub to lose most of its oxygen supply and has injured a crewman who is bleeding badly and is going to die from his wound no matter what happens. The remaining oxygen is not sufficient for the entire crew to make it to the surface. The only way to save the other crew members is for John to shoot dead the injured crewman now. Then there will be just enough oxygen for the rest of the crew to survive. So what should John do? Well, if you take many people who take a deontological approach to it would say that their religious beliefs state that they should not kill, so they won't kill the person. On the other hand, if someone's taking the utilitarian view, the greatest good would be to perhaps kill the injured crewman so that everyone else survives. So the rest of the crew survives, and that this particular one person would die, but it would do the greatest good, have the least harm for most of the people. So you can see how the decision could be changed based on which ethical approach someone is taking at the time. In summary, we can apply ethics to a lot of decisions within an organizational situation. And the main thing to keep in mind is that your morals will help guide your ethical decisions along the way.